Welcome back to Money Theory. Today we're talking about a number so massive that it almost doesn't sound real. $1 trillion. In June 2026, Elon Musk became the first person in history to reach it. But here's the crazy part. This wasn't a man who simply inherited his way to the top. He got fired from companies he helped build. His rockets kept exploding. Tesla nearly went bankrupt. At one point, he was borrowing money from friends just to survive. And somehow, all of those failures eventually led to a $1 trillion fortune. So how did Elon Musk go from a bullied kid in South Africa to the richest person in human history? Let's break it down. June 2026. SpaceX goes public, and Elon Musk becomes the first trillionaire the world has ever seen. The next richest person on the planet is sitting at around $300 billion. And here's the wild part. If you've got a single dollar in your pocket, you are mathematically closer to that guy than he is to Elon. So how does one person end up that far out in front of everyone else? This is the story of a man who got fired from both companies he built, who bet everything he had on rockets that kept blowing up and somehow still ended up here. Pretoria, South Africa, 1971, a baby is born into a comfortable enough household. An engineer for a father, a Canadian-born model for a mother, a nice house in a nice part of town. They name him Elon Reeve Musk. On paper, that's a solid start. In reality, his parents split up when he was 9. Feeling bad for his father, who came across as lonely and down, Elon decides to move in with him, helped along by the fact that Dad also happened to own a personal computer. Smooth move, kid. He'd later call this the worst decision of his life. School wasn't much kinder. Elon was small, awkward around other kids, and had this irritating tendency to correct people. Someone says 2 + 2 is 5, and he's the one piping up that no, actually it's 4, you're wrong. Naturally, the response to that is getting stuffed into a locker. He was nowhere near the top of the playground pecking order, and the bullying he got wasn't the mild kind. One beating landed him in the hospital for 2 full weeks. For most kids, an experience like that breaks something. For Elon, it just pushed him further into himself, into books, into science fiction, deeper into his own head. By 12, that turned into code. He taught himself to program out of a library manual and built a video game called Blaster, a space shooter with alien fleets, hydrogen bombs, and the apocalypse baked in. Standard stuff for a 12-year-old, obviously. He sold it to a tech magazine for $500. By 17, South Africa's mandatory military service was closing in, with the apartheid government expecting him to serve. Elon took one look at that and passed. His mother had been born in Canada, so he used that to get a Canadian passport, packed a single bag, and left the country. Canada wasn't glamorous at first. He shoveled grain, worked a lumber mill, cleaned out boiler rooms in a hazmat suit. Basically the standard immigrant grind, rough jobs, thin paychecks, and a crash course in resilience. Eventually he landed at the University of Pennsylvania to study economics and physics, then got into Stanford's PhD program. Genuinely impressive. He lasted 2 days before dropping out, because it was 1995 and the internet was growing at something like 2,300% a year. Once Elon saw that number, Stanford could wait indefinitely. He called up his brother Kimball, and together they launched Zip2, an online city guide for newspapers packed with business listings, maps, and phone numbers. Essentially Google Maps before Google Maps existed. Great concept. Only issue, nobody wanted it yet. Investors passed. Newspapers passed. Rejection after rejection. But slowly, papers started signing up, venture capital started flowing in, and Zip2 began to take off. That's when the investors decided the company needed a more experienced CEO than its own founder, and Elon got bumped down to Chief Technology Officer. He hated every second of it. Lucky for him, Compaq bought Zip2 in 1999 for $37 million, and Elon walked away with $22 million of it at just 27 years old. Most people in that position buy a mansion, kick back, maybe get weirdly into boats. Elon poured most of the money straight into an online bank. Yes, internet banking in 1999. The company was called X.com, and as it happened, another startup working on almost the exact same idea called Confinity was operating out of the same building on a different floor. Two companies, one elevator, one idea, both hemorrhaging cash. Eventually, they merged into what became PayPal, with Elon as CEO, who then immediately pushed to migrate the whole backend onto Microsoft Windows, a call plenty of engineers thought was reckless. The infighting escalated fast, and the board eventually staged a takeover, timing it for the exact moment Elon was 35,000 feet over the Pacific on a delayed honeymoon flight to Australia, completely out of reach. By the time he landed, the vote was already done. He'd been fired from the company he built, again still. In 2002, eBay bought PayPal for $1.5 billion, and Elon's cut came out to roughly $180 million. And he was about to do something so reckless that his own friends put together a video specifically to talk him out of it. A highlight reel of every private rocket venture that had ever collapsed, every launch that had exploded, every dream that turned into smoke and expensive ocean debris. He watched the whole thing. Then he started SpaceX anyway, dumping $100 million, most of his PayPal payout, straight into it. Not long after, he threw millions more into a struggling little electric car company called Tesla. Now he had two companies at once, one trying to build working rockets, the other trying to make electric cars desirable. Neither had actually pulled off the thing it existed to do. What could go wrong? Pretty much everything. SpaceX built the Falcon 1 and shipped the team out to a tiny coral speck in the Marshall Islands called Omelek Island, a lovely place to vacation, a brutal place to keep failing at rocket science. The first launch in March 2006 ended in a fuel leak that destroyed the rocket, wiping out 2 years of work in seconds. The second launch also went into the ocean. The third, in August 2008, looked genuinely promising. Clean first stage, clean separation, second stage ignition, right up until the spent first stage, still carrying leftover thrust, drifted back and slammed into the second stage. Feed goes dead. Bad news all around. One more shot left. Meanwhile, Tesla was falling apart in its own way. The Roadster was 2 years behind schedule and $50 million over budget, the transmission flat out didn't work, and costs kept climbing. Elon fired the CEO and stepped into the role himself. Then September 2008 hit, Lehman Brothers collapsed, markets seized up, and investors stopped picking up the phone. Every company on shaky ground suddenly discovered that promised funding isn't the same as funding in hand. Elon himself was personally broke, borrowing money from friends to cover rent, freshly divorced, watching his third rocket sit at the bottom of the Pacific, while Tesla was mere days from missing payroll. Safe to say, morale wasn't exactly soaring. The math was brutal and simple. SpaceX had enough cash left for exactly one more launch attempt, and if it failed, the company was finished. Tesla needed an emergency infusion too. Elon had to pick, save one company, or split what little he had left and risk losing both. Most people play it safe and choose one. He split it down the middle. September 28, 2008, Omelek Island. The full SpaceX team assembled. No backup plan, no fifth rocket waiting in the wings, no second chance if this went wrong. First stage, clean. Separation, clean. Second stage ignition, clean. 15 seconds. 30, 60, 90, it sails past the point where the last attempt had failed, and it just keeps going. They're in orbit. For the first time ever, a privately funded, liquid-fueled rocket had made it to space. The control room erupted. Grown engineers broke down crying, some just collapsed into their chairs, others sat frozen, unable to fully register that it had actually worked. 3 months later, NASA handed SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract to keep the International Space Station resupplied. Around the same time, Tesla closed its emergency funding round with only hours to spare. The gamble had paid off, but surviving and actually winning are two very different things, and Elon wanted to win. By 2012, Tesla rolled out the Model S, 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds, over 265 miles on a single charge, a luxury electric car that made the rest of the auto industry look like it was still building fax machines with wheels bolted on. The company that had nearly died 2 years earlier was suddenly the most talked about carmaker on the planet. And with some breathing room for the first time in a decade, Elon turned his attention back to SpaceX with a new complaint. Every single launch, the first stage booster, roughly 70% of the rocket's total cost, burns through its fuel, separates, and drops into the ocean gone for good, so they have to build a brand new one from scratch every time. His solution: stop doing that. Land the booster instead. Nobody had ever landed an orbital-class rocket booster before, which at least meant there was no competition to worry about. What followed was a long, expensive, extremely public string of boosters trying to land and instead turning into fireballs, boosters slamming into drone ships, boosters tipping over, boosters simply exploding. SpaceX's official term for each failure was rapid unscheduled disassembly, which is engineer speak for "it blew up, please don't fire us." Then, on December 21, 2015, a Falcon 9 booster delivered its payload to orbit, flipped around, fell back through the atmosphere, extended its landing legs, and touched down upright on the pad, just stood there like it belonged. That single landing rewrote the economics of spaceflight. Launch costs dropped from around $150 million a flight to $62 million and falling. And that opened the door to something new entirely: cheap, repeatable, large-scale satellite launches. Enter Starlink, a satellite network beaming internet down to remote villages, disaster zones, and rural stretches that cable providers had quietly ignored for decades. At this point, it looked like Elon had finally won everything. The cars worked. The rockets landed. Starlink was scaling fast. A normal person would take the win and relax. Elon decided the next battle was artificial intelligence. Back in 2015, he'd helped co-found OpenAI. Worried about what might happen if a single corporation ended up controlling super-intelligent AI, the idea was an open, non-profit counterweight to that. Then Microsoft poured in billions, the models grew less open over time, and the project meant to prevent an AI monopoly drifted uncomfortably close to becoming one, just under a different name. By 2022, Elon had no real foothold in AI at all. So he bought Twitter for $44 billion. On the surface, it looked impulsive. Underneath the surface, it also looked pretty impulsive. But there was a logic to it. AI runs on data. And Twitter was one of the largest real-time archives of human thought on the internet. Every argument, every market rumor, every breaking story, all sitting right there. Whoever controlled that data controlled a training ground for the next wave of AI. In 2023, with that data now his, Elon launched XAI, his own lab, his own models, built to catch up with AI companies that had years of head start while he was busy landing rockets. Great, so now there's AI. Next step, drop it into the cars and roll out full self-driving. Except regulators still hadn't fully signed off on that. Fine, then build the largest rocket in history and send it to Mars, except that needs FAA clearance too. So he could build the future, apparently, but he still needed permission to actually use it. And then, conveniently, an election rolled around. In 2024, Donald Trump ran for president, and Elon donated roughly $290 million to the effort, showing up at rallies and posting nonstop, turning into one of the most visible political donors in modern American history. Trump won, and Wall Street didn't bother waiting to see what actual policy would look like. It just priced in the expectation immediately. Tesla surged. SpaceX's private valuation climbed. By sometime in 2025, Elon's net worth had crossed $700 billion. The machine was essentially built, but one obstacle remained. SpaceX had stayed private for 24 years because Elon wanted full control. He'd been demoted at Zip2 and fired from PayPal mid-flight over the Pacific, and the lesson stuck: never hand someone else the wheel. But Starship, SpaceX's massive next-generation rocket built to carry people and cargo to the Moon, Mars, and beyond, needed serious capital. So the public money had to come in. In February 2026, SpaceX absorbed xAI, and by extension, X along with it. The rocket company, the AI lab, and the social platform were folded into one giant entity getting ready to go public. Which raises an obvious question: are investors really being asked to buy a rocket company that's also an AI company that also happens to own the artist formerly known as Twitter, whose profitability seems to shift by the day? That's not one business. That's three expensive problems sharing a hoodie. Except, the argument goes, it actually is one system. AI is about to demand an absurd amount of computing power, massive data centers packed with chips chewing through electricity, generating heat, straining power grids. Eventually, Earth itself becomes the bottleneck. Not enough power, not enough cooling, not enough land. So move the data centers into orbit. SpaceX launches them. Starlink connects them. xAI runs on them. And X feeds them real-time data from hundreds of millions of people arguing online. No other company on Earth can do all four at once. That either sounds like genius or like the outcome of a bad bet made at 3 in the morning. Because from another angle, xAI is burning through billions, X is still trying to prove it can turn a consistent profit, and SpaceX, the one part of this that investors actually understand, is being asked to carry the whole operation on its back. So, the real question is whether investors are buying one integrated system or three enormously expensive bets duct taped to a rocket. Wall Street didn't seem to care either way. The combined entity was valued at $1.77 trillion, priced at $135 a share, the largest IPO ever recorded. June 12, 2026, NASDAQ, the opening bell rings, and SpaceX stock starts trading. The order book looks unlike anything the exchange has ever handled. The first trade goes through, the price climbs, and it keeps climbing. By the closing bell, SpaceX's market cap has crossed $2 trillion, bigger than Meta, bigger than Disney, bigger than companies that used to sound impossibly massive, all on its very first day as a public company. Then, on Bloomberg's Billionaires Index, a number shows up that breaks the page's usual formatting: $1 trillion. No human being in recorded history had ever crossed that line. Not Rockefeller, not any king, emperor, or pharaoh who ever lived. Someone screenshots it and posts it on X, and it becomes the most viewed post of the day. To the rest of the world, the headline was simple: Elon Musk had just become the first trillionaire in history. But Elon himself wasn't at NASDAQ, wasn't at a podium, wasn't anywhere near the opening bell. He was at Starbase in South Texas, still on the job, standing next to Starship, the rocket meant to carry people to the Moon, to Mars, and maybe, eventually, further still. At 12 years old, Elon Musk made a video game about space, aliens, and saving the world. He sold it for $500. More than 4 decades later, that same kid became the first person in history to reach a $1 trillion fortune. But here's the thing: the $1 trillion isn't really the end of this story. It's the beginning of the next one. Because Elon isn't sitting on a beach counting his money. He's still building rockets. He's still trying to put humans on Mars. He's still betting on artificial intelligence. And he's still trying to build things that at first glance sound completely impossible. Maybe that's the real lesson of Elon Musk's story. The money wasn't the original goal. The goal was always the next impossible thing. And now, after becoming the world's first trillionaire, there's really only one question left. Can the kid who dreamed about space actually make it to Mars? We'll find out. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.